equality, diversity and inclusion. That is our core purpose and core mission. And as an organisation, we are very much a values-driven organisation, and I will say more about that. So for us, we have a core value of being a non-profit organisation. That's really important to us. It's been a driver for us since we began, and we began just under 10 years ago in 2012. So we'll be shortly celebrating our 10th anniversary. So we're quite a young organisation. We work predominantly across the UK, although we are increasingly reaching into new audiences and new markets globally. And the main core of our business is around providing training and consultancy and research, particularly focusing on the themes of equality, diversity and inclusion. And I'll say more about what those are related to in a moment. We have another core value, which for us is a really key and important value, which is around being equalities led. And so what I mean by that is that everybody who works with us as an individual, as a consultant, everyone who is part of our team, whether they're either in the staff team or whether they're working with us on a self-employment basis as a consultant, comes from a background of bringing their own lived experience of the topics that we teach and train and share around. We're very much about education and awareness and campaigns, and that's a core value for us. So for example, when we're talking about disability, that conversation is led by disabled people. Similarly, around mental health, around race, around transgender awareness, those conversations are led by the people who have that lived experience. And I'll talk about my own lived experience in a moment. As well as being the executive director, I'm also one of the founders. We were 3 people that started the organisation just under 10 years ago, and I have been driving and leading the organisation over that period of time. We're not an organisation like a training provider that just has equality, diversity and inclusion as an add-on. It's not a sideline for us. It's absolutely at the core of who we are and what we do. So it's a really important integral part of who we are. We work across all sectors, so as well as working with others in the non-profit sphere, so with charities, large and small, and other voluntary and community organisations and social enterprises. We also do a lot of work within the public space, so with education, with health, with housing, with local government, and in some national government departments as well. So we work across all sectors as well as with the private sector. And that's really with organisations that are large and small. So we work with the very, very smallest micro organisations and also include some significant organisations in our client list as well, quite large organisations. Another key value for us is about being research and evidence-based driven. So to achieve that, we do a lot of collaborative working and partnership working, particularly with higher education, so people that are working within the university sector. We partner with academics and other researchers so that the core messages that we're sharing are coming from a place of integrity and authenticity and are really driven by having a sense of a knowledge and a purpose of what communities are saying to us is needed for that culture change, that social change to occur. So that's a really, really vital message for us, is to make sure that those collaborations are informing and ensuring that awareness is a key piece of the delivery of our interventions. So my background, where I've come from, so I came out as a gay man back in the 1980s. And that's really driven my lived experience. And my experience at that time, for those that have any knowledge of what the 1980s was like, you know, it was a time politically very difficult, particularly for gay people. And that's not to say in many parts of the world today, it's a really, really, really challenging time. But also, I think historically there were difficulties, particularly when we had things like the global pandemic of HIV and AIDS came along in the early 1980s, and that had a really big impact on the community that I was just coming out into. And that really drove me to be activist, campaigning, wanting to get involved. And so I started volunteering in organizations working around equalities and inequalities, particularly back in the late 80s and early 90s. I'd been very driven by my experiences, particularly of the HIV and AIDS pandemic. I started working in the sector about 30 years ago, originally in HIV services, and I broadened that out into other areas. So it included work locally and nationally and internationally. So, for example, I worked at the level of the European Union, European Parliament for a while, doing some campaigning work around health inequalities. My background is very broad. So as well as working in HIV and AIDS, I've also worked in other areas of health inequalities. So for example, I've worked with large charities that are focusing on mental health and campaigning and awareness around mental health, substance misuse, particularly in the addiction and recovery space, so working with alcohol and drugs. And as well as that, I've also worked in domestic violence and abuse. And part of that work for me was driven by my own lived experience of being in an abusive relationship back in the 1990s with a same-sex partner. And I knew from my own lived experience that the way people were treated by the police and by other services, there was almost like not being able to see that domestic violence was happening within same-sex relationships. So I've done a lot of work, and I know others have as well, to try and address that. As well as that, I've also been a youth worker for about 26 years, and I am really proud of the fact that here in the UK, I was able to set up a youth project back in the early 1990s that's still running on now today. So it's about 26 years it's been running, and I was one of the founders of that organisation, and it's been really championing and campaigning for better youth provision, better youth services, better youth reach into young people's lives and the impact of young people. As well as that, I'm also a Stonewall UK education role model. Stonewall is a national charity here in the UK, but it does campaign both nationally and internationally to improve the rights and the quality of life, and really to have a voice for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans communities. And I'm an education role model, which means I go and give talks, a little bit like the talk here, and actually have that talk in a school setting. So I will go and do assemblies with groups of young people, go and do workshops, etc. So I'm a champion and a campaigner for that organisation as well. So I've won some awards for my work along the way, and one of the ones I'm really, really proud of is the work that I did with an organisation who were trying to have a better understanding around how to tackle domestic violence and abuse. And what we were looking at is what we call cultural competency, which is, from my perspective, where you are culturally aware of the specific needs of individuals within communities, and often within diverse communities. And so the work that I was doing was specifically focusing on tackling domestic violence and abuse within same-sex relationships and the experiences of LGBT people. As well as that, I also was part of a domestic homicide review where we tragically saw the death of a young person who had been in a violent relationship and had reached out for help, but that relationship had not been viewed as problematic by some of the audiences and the services that young person was reaching out to. So there were significant lessons learned. And one of the recommendations from that report and that work was that the services should have training around better understanding, particularly in relation to that cultural competence. So I've been included on a happy city list as somebody who makes the world a happier place. And I've been awarded a number of awards and nominations, particularly in the Diversity Awards. And this year I was nominated for a Lifetime Achiever Award in the National Diversity Awards. And when I told my mum, who's not much older, she's in her 70s now, when I told my mum that I was being nominated for a Lifetime Achiever Award, she said that made her feel quite old. So and we chuckled. So I want to reflect then for us on some of the key lessons and experiences that we've had over the last year or so, particularly since the COVID pandemic, and we had a national lockdown here in March of 2020. And what that experience taught us, I think, was that we had been able to put a lot of our resources and materials online. So we were really fortunate in that we'd been developing as quite a digital organization probably from the outset, so almost from the time we incorporated in 2012. And so back in 2018, we did a piece of work where it meant that we were able to ensure that all of our resources and all of our materials were available online, and we shared that through our website and through our social media. We do blogging, we do podcasting, and it meant that we were quite already set up to be able to deliver our interventions online. So we literally had to very quickly adapt a lot of our services. So a lot of our groups, for example, went online, but also our training went online. And it meant that we could have this amazing reach into different audiences. So rather than having to travel to go to a venue and to deliver a program or a course or to do some work around education within a setting, it meant that immediately we were able to literally from our own space have an audience in front of us. So we've reached a lot larger audiences very quickly. We've also had a reach in terms of increasing our reach internationally. So for example, I was on a call last year where we had people dialing in from the US, from the UK, from Europe and Asia. So it meant that we could reach much wider audiences with our core messages of equality, diversity, equity and inclusion. The other key impact for us last year was when George Floyd was killed in May and the subsequent rise of the Black Lives Matter campaign and the protests around the world. What we saw almost immediately after George Floyd's death was an increase in demand, and that increase was really significant. So in the first few months immediately after George Floyd's death in May last year, we saw about 1,000% increase in demand on us as an organisation. So we'd come from quite a small non-profit micro organisation, and we had to respond and react, and we had this huge amount of growth potential. So we actually grew our turnover by about 100% last year, and that growth is continuing. So what we had to do was we had to try and find more resources. We had to bring in more people, and we did that through a number of different approaches. So we used word of mouth. We also brought in people through some recruitment campaigns, and we now have a really robust and very supportive staff team who I'm leading and working with to ensure that we meet our clients' demands, as well as bringing in new consultants who specialise in the core areas of their campaigns. This had also been impacted by other campaigns, for example, the Me Too movement and the rights of girls and young women, and also the rights of women generally, and campaigning around sexism and misogyny, as well as the rights of trans people and the Trans Lives Matter campaign. So we almost saw this critical mass, this critical storm between suddenly everything going online, our audience is growing, our audience is having a farther reach than we'd ever had before, because we had been originally quite localized and we'd become national, and then we were starting to become more internationally recognized. And also these global influences from the death of George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Me Too and Trans Lives Matter. So there was this critical storm that was happening for us, and it was really on very tragic events, you know, the COVID pandemic and those various, particularly the death of George Floyd. It was like this critical structure was impacting on us as an organisation, and we rose to the challenge around that. So we were hiring in talent and bringing new people into the organisation, and that was something that was really critical for us, because we wanted to be able to respond to this really significant increase in demand. When you see literally overnight 1,000% increase in demand, it has an impact on you as an organisation. You know, it causes you sleepless nights, as you can imagine. And we were really wanting to develop the team and bring in some new people into the organisation. And, you know, I absolutely would not be able to be here today and saying these things to you if it wasn't for the support of the team. We also launched a number of new programs. One of the first things that we did immediately after May was we launched programs around anti-racism. Now, we'd been doing anti-racism work for nearly a decade since we'd begun, and we wanted to bring in a real focal point into the work that we do. So, we had programs in place around equality and inclusion. We had programs around mental health, around gender and sex, around race, but we really wanted to develop that anti-racism program. So we set up a program called It's About Race, and that's really been developing. And the team that is led by my colleague and friend Russell Thomas, who is leading that team of consultants who are really developing and delivering that program, and they are reaching, really increasing audiences with that particular program of work. We've also brought in new areas of work around disability, around autism and neurodiversity, around better understanding of domestic violence and abuse. So it's meant that we've been able to literally diversify within our own diverse offer, and that's led us to us being able to meet the demand in terms of what clients are asking us for. We've won new clients across all sectors, nationally and globally. And one of the sectors which we've seen a lot of development in is the private sector. So historically, in the first few years of us existing, we very much were based within communities. We were quite locally well known. We were working predominantly in the voluntary community and social enterprise sector, but we did have some of the public sector clients, so particularly education and health and police. Those kind of public sector organisations within a local space were very much in bringing us in. But what's happened in the last year or so is that we've had much more of a national reach. So, for example, now our client list just in the higher education space is dramatically increased. So we're now counting some really significant higher education and university clients amongst our client group. But as well as that, we've also increased our reach into the private sector, and we're seeing more and more private sector organisations coming to us. And what they're coming to us for is really two things. One is to support their staff in their development and their understanding around, for example, around anti-racism or anti-sexism and misogyny, but they're also wanting us to walk alongside their organisation and provide consultancy and support for them so that they do better, so that their own culture within their own organisations is improving, and that the staff see that they're actually taking on board the key messages. So in a sense, although there has been a reaction to those global incidents, there's also been a real appetite. And I think for us, a lot of what we've experienced is, it's been knocking on an open door, and organizations and companies and businesses have wanted to come to us and say, will you partner with us and actually take us on a journey so that we can learn from your experience, and particularly from your lived experience. And that was a real opportunity for us to share those key messages, which has led to that really significant increase in demand and turnover. We've also been included among some other really significant influencers. So I was literally holding a phone at one point and had a tweet come in where we were put in a list alongside the United Nations and the Disaster Emergency Committee as global influencers. And when I think, to myself, reflecting back now on, this small entity that I had created with a couple of other people and how it had grown and was being considered in that way was quite a significant leap, really. The other impact is on sponsorship and donations. So not only were we being asked to work with client organizations and deliver training, deliver campaigns, deliver consultancy and work with those organizations, we were also seeing an increase of individual donations, literally individual people giving donations to advance our work because they believed in our core value messages around influencing social change. And I'm incredibly grateful to those individual donations. As well as that, we also had the more corporate sponsorship approaches. So we had businesses that were wanting to work with us and engage with us and take the journey with us. And so we've been able to bring in about 5 or 6 really brilliant corporate sponsorships that have been supporting our work along the way over the last year. And I'm incredibly grateful for the support that they give us, because for us, that means that we've got an increase in our unrestricted funds. So it means that we can do work that isn't commissioned or directly, brought in by commissioners or by clients. It means that we can be more creative and we can actually create our own content and design and develop our own campaigns. So that's been a really important area of development for us in the last year. We've also been able to increase our reach really significantly. And, just that one experience of reaching out into those really large audiences. And yeah, the messages are going to be different and they're not going to be the same as they may be in the UK context, but actually a value of people, an underpinning of respect, which is the core message of what we're trying to share. I think that does reach into a much wider audience. We also had quite a significant amount of media response, so not always positive. Sometimes we do get backlash. We deal with controversial matters, particularly around the rights of trans and non-binary people, for example. And we do have sometimes some slightly some detrimental or negative media, but overwhelmingly we've had really positive media, and that's been a really lovely response, and has kind of boosted us really as an organization, because it means that we get to reach more people with those core messages. So what I'd like to reflect on then next is the lessons that we've learned over the last year particularly. So one of the things for me is about really trusting in the process. And what I mean by that is that if you have an idea and you want to develop that idea, in my experience, it's been so beneficial to allow that process to develop, allow the idea to develop, talk to people, bring people in, bring people along on the journey, because I really believe, if you build it, they will come. And I think that's a really important key message. It means to me that, when we have been able to develop and grow and respond and react and all of those aspects, it means that just allowing that trust to continue. Yes, there are scary places and we do go through scary experiences. Are we going to be able to meet the demand? Will we be able to recruit the right people? How do we respond? What happens when you do get those negative responses and reactions to the work that you're doing? But I think for me, it's just that kind of keeping on, carrying on is a really important approach. And that global events have a direct impact. So something that may happen in another part of the world will really have that very direct impact on you as an organization. And it can be ground shaking, it can be earth shaking, and it can be so far reaching. If you had said to me, even under 2 years ago, I would be here today talking about what I'm talking about, I would be like, I think you're talking about a different organization. I don't think you're talking about the Diversity Trust, but it obviously means that, those types of events that have really significant consequences that go all around the world, and I think they shake people up. And yes, of course, there's always going to be reaction, and some of that reaction will be negative and detrimental. But I think it's important just to keep on, because if you have a feeling, like I have a feeling, that what I'm wanting to shape and to develop and to grow and to continue, the conversations are the right conversations. They're the kind of conversations where they're lifting people up, where they're enabling people, where they're making sure that people have a voice, where they're making sure people have influence within communities and within society. Then I think it's absolutely the case that that's a way in which the impact will continue. That tech can be used for good. We have really seen such a growth in our own tech use. So a lot of the platforms that we've been using, which we've been working with over years, but they hadn't ever really, I don't think, been embraced to the same level as we have done in the last year, and that you're reaching audiences that are so much more significant in the scale and size and impact that you're having. And actually, if you have access to that tech, then make use of that tech, because for us, that's been a really important and really powerful win. You can't do everything yourself. Bring people in. One of the things I learned really early on in my experience of the last 10 years is that, when you try to do everything yourself, it's really quite detrimental, because it means that you possibly will burn out, or it means that you might end up, having those sleepless nights. It means that you might drop the ball and actually not be able to be as responsive. But the other challenge around that for me is that you then lose the opportunity you have to be able to be creative. So if you're bringing in or outsourcing, or however it is, if you're recruiting staff or bringing in volunteers, the more resource and the more people that you have to be able to support you. And it's almost like it's cumulative, because the more you let go, in my experience, the more you let go, the more that actually then comes to you. And it's about going back to that trust in the process again. So I'm a great believer in that. It's a lesson. It's a lesson that I had to learn, and I'm hoping it's a lesson that will be useful to share. Sometimes the unexpected happens. I could never have predicted what we have experienced in the last year. It's impossible. The last year to 18 months, it would be impossible to have predicted that. And it's often positive, sometimes negative, but actually that trust there, that underpinning and underlining of trust is really important. And letting go, absolutely letting go, is crucial in all of this. But the other message I think is really important for us is that it's not only about looking externally, but sometimes the answer is right there in front of you, and it's an internal answer. So, for example, when I think about some of our experiences recently around recruitment and development, we had a real challenge over the last few months to recruit. And what we ended up doing was just looking in-house, and actually the answers are already there. The people were there. We just hadn't been thinking creatively enough. So yes, sometimes it's important to bring people in and to get help from outside and to have external support and bringing people in. But sometimes also it's about nurturing who you have within your own organizations, within the volunteers that you work with, within the clients that you're working with, within your existing staff. It might be that those are the people that you can bring and develop and grow and nurture. And actually, sometimes the answers are right there in front of you, and you just need to look in a different way with a different lens. It's also important, I think, not only to be looking forward and planning, and we've just gone through a whole process for ourselves around our business plan and developing that, but also it's about reflecting back, looking backwards as well. And for me, that's a really vital lesson, because where I think a lot of our learning has come from is in our own reflection, and it's in our own self-reflection. And I think it's important that we not only think and plan and go forward, but also that we reflect back and where we've come from and the lessons that we've learned along the way and the journey that we've been on and the people and the assets and the resources that we've been able to bring forward with us, because a lot of that has so much value. And I think there's a lot of value in the people that we brought along with us. And I think that's really the key for me about where we see that value. So we are very, very live on social media, and we're at Diversity Trust on most platforms. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. So it's really easy to find us and to follow us, and our website is there. And people can get in touch with us via that, or via email, or via phone, or via post. So there's a lot of ways of reaching out and engaging with us. And, for me, we're really wanting to have conversations with individuals, with organizations, and with groups where we can collaborate and partner, particularly with organizations perhaps that are UK based or outside the UK and other parts of the world, where you feel that having a conversation with us and reaching out to us may bring value to the work that you're doing already. So if there's an element of the work that you think would be a valuable element, so for example, if it's around that work around equality and diversity and inclusion, which we are really specialist in, if it would be of a value to reach into us, then I would really encourage you to do that. Because, we are, although we're very much focused on UK, we are very much wanting to reach out and reach wider audiences and reach into communities. Another particularly important area of the work that we do is around developing specialist services, and we can help and support other organisations around that model. So, for example, if you're looking at community development or community cohesion work within communities, then particularly within a local area or regional area or national area, then we've got some experience around that, around talking to commissioners, around how we respond to grant funding, grant grant writing, and we've actually partnered up with a number of other organisations over the years who have been able to develop their organisation because we've been able to collaborate and partner with them. So I would really encourage you to reach out and to contact us if that's something that you'd like to explore a conversation with, and I'd be really up for having that conversation with you. So thank you so much for listening to my talk, and I wish you well for the rest of the day. And yes, I'll be really happy to take any questions. Thank you.